Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
You know, in society, accountability has become a very important concept and buzzword. We want our political leaders to be accountable. We want our faith leaders to be accountable, business leaders to be accountable. You know, people hardly ever talk about the accountability of judges. And so what really excites me about today's episode is that Justice Jill Karofsky, Wisconsin's newest Supreme Court justice, gives us a peek behind the bench, behind the court, to help us to understand how these processes work and opportunities for them to do their jobs better. And to be quite honest, when it comes to corrections, law enforcement, and judicial professionals, other than election, we don't really talk a lot about how we hold them accountable. So when the subject of a report talking about the racial disparities of how Black men are sentenced in Wisconsin was hidden for months, I felt that needed to come out in the open, and let's name the person who did it, because if I were to stand before Justice Rogan Sachs' court, she'd want nothing less than accountability from me. And so I think she should be held to that same level of scrutiny. And this is not a personal attack. I don't know her. I've met her, but don't know her. And so think about accountability, and that those of us who live in this society, this great society where we vote and still hold to some semblance of what we call democracy, we have the right to hold anyone who holds a position of authority in our community. We have the right to hold them accountable. So today we're talking about subjects, and let's clean that up. So let's think about the whole concept of accountability and how we hold judges accountable as we listen to today's really exciting episode with Jill Karofsky. Hey, good people. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. I'm excited about season 5 as we're perpetually asking the question, now what? So many major monumental things have changed. Many think that it's for the good. Many think it's not so good. But we all probably can agree that we can't just stop and do nothing, that we have not fully arrived. And so that's what we're talking about this whole season. And I'm bringing in various guests to talk about their roles within this world of helping things to be better, and some ideas that they have in what should happen next, and how do we really become more equitable, more accessible, more fair to everyone. My guest today is no stranger to Black Like Me. She's a personal friend, good person. She is Justice Jill Karofsky. She is the newest elected member to the Wisconsin Supreme Court that took place in April of last year. Before her election to the Supreme Court, she served as a Dane County Circuit Judge, where she was elected, I believe, in 2017. She did a number of things before coming to the bench. She was the executive director of the Office of Crime Victim Services for the state of Wisconsin. She was an assistant state attorney general, and a plethora of other things that are just really, impressive. She was Wisconsin's first violence against women resource prosecutor, and has served on so many committees and organizations and boards. It's just I don't know how she has time to do that. And I had to Google this. She's an ultra marathoner. I know what a marathon is. That's 26 miles and some yards, 375 or something. But she's an ultra marathoner. We're going to ask her about that when she comes on. Judge Karofsky, welcome to Black Like Me.
Hi, Alex. It's good to be back here again. It's great always to chat with you.
The feeling is mutual. So listen, an ultra marathoner, is that 50 miles or at least 50 miles?
So the definition is anything further than a marathon. I have run ultras that are 50 kilometers, so 31 miles, 50 miles, I ran 102.27 miles this summer on the day that I was sworn in, and I saw you at the 35-mile mark there. I was very, very happy
I have
to see your
photos.
face.
I've
And I
been
didn't know
photos.
until that point that you were a photographer. Those photos were fabulous, and thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
sharing them with me.
You're welcome. You are welcome. Well, I'm so glad that you're here. So it's been almost a year that you've been on the bench, and is it what you thought it would be? I know it's only a year, and it's COVID, and we're doing all of these things, and your bench sometimes is at your own home, but is being on the Supreme Court what you thought it would be so far?
I think it's like any new job. There are things that I anticipated, and those have turned out to be true. There are things I didn't expect. There are some pleasant surprises. There are some surprises that maybe aren't as pleasant. And it's like for everyone, it's really a challenge to start a new job during a pandemic. I haven't been with my colleagues in the same room since I started. We do all of our oral arguments by Zoom, and we do all of our conferences by Zoom. And I think that the biggest problem with that, or one of the biggest, is that you miss those informal, well, I'll call them water cooler conversations,
Right.
where you really get to know people and know about their families or their kids or some funny thing that happened to them on the way to work this morning. We miss all of those smaller interactions that are so important to developing good, strong relationships with people. And so I miss that very, very much. I think the upside of COVID is that the court system is much more accessible through Zoom and through YouTube and through Wisconsin Eye. So I think people have a window into the court system that they haven't had previously. And I think that's a really, really great thing. So people understand how their third branch of government operates.
That's good. That's interesting. You know, I've forgotten that you were an assistant state attorney general at one time. I'm sure you would say that a little bit of every role in which you served has helped you to become a justice. But is there one particular job or role that you've held, and you can't say being a parent, that is you think
Darn
has
it.
really, well, yeah, I shouldn't have said that. I should have has really shaped you and helped you to have the temperament to do this. And you know what? Let me take that disclaimer off the board. You can say off the table. You can say parenting if you like. But is there any one committee, life experience, role that you've had that has probably helped your temperament the most in becoming a justice?
As far as my temperament and making sure that when I think about the word temperament, I think about making sure that I am that my nervous system isn't in like a hyper arousal mode. That is, that I'm not in fight or flight, and
Sure.
that my nervous system and my brain is using the smart part of my brain, the prefrontal cortex. So I need to always make sure that I am I'm leaving whatever's troubling me at the door. I used to think about when I was entering my circuit court courtroom, that I wanted to feel as I entered that room exactly how I wanted my pilot or my surgeon to feel when he or she walked into the cockpit or the operating room. That's how good I needed to feel every single time. And I do that every single time I come into this office. I walk up 2 flights of stairs in the Capitol, 131 steps and 132 steps. I don't know why, but that's what the numbers are. And I come to where the Supreme Court is, and I am awestruck every day I come up here. I try to find some different molding or piece of art or something in the building that I haven't seen the day before as I walk in, to make every day a little different than the day before. And I'm very, very mindful of entering this job in this place, being the best I can be every day. And I'm not really sure where that molding came from. And I think partly it came from playing sports as a kid. I think being in the district attorney's office, where I had to prosecute cases and spend time in courtrooms with people, helping crime victims seek justice, I learned how important it was for each of them, for me to be on my game. Certainly at the attorney general's office, when I was training prosecutors, I had to be on my game. And like I said, as a circuit court judge, you and I both have a very good friend, Steve Elke, who was one of my mentors when I started at the at the circuit court. And he has a very, very calm demeanor in court and is very, very respectful to everyone who comes into his courtroom. And I spent a lot of time watching him in the couple months before I started. And I think that was very, very impactful for me.
That's really insightful. And we both know that Elke loses that decorum on the tennis court, though, doesn't
I am
he?
so happy you said that. Thank you. Yeah, 100%.
So if listeners haven't figured it out by now, Jill and I play doubles in tennis from time to time, and let's just say that when we're playing on the same side, I'm a little nervous because she's very competitive and very good, but also has been coaching me. And so, but Elke is anything but a calm force. I won't tell you what he says to me when the two of us are playing against, you and your partner, but I'm just saying, when you and I are playing together, I feel like I get a lot of encouragement.
I love playing with you. Those days are fun. We need to go do it again.
We do.
Mostly because the laughs.
Definitely.
It feels good to laugh that hard.
And they're not all at me. A lot of them are, but not all of them are at me. No.
You downplay your tennis prowess, Alex. You are a good. The only things I ever say to you is just stay up at the net, because you'll take a step or two back, and you shouldn't. You are awesome at the net. And I just said to you, just keep up there.
Definitely.
Stay up there, and it worked.
Right. And the other thing you constantly say to me is, Alex, that didn't hurt. Come on, take one in the eye for the team. That serve did not hurt the back of your head. What's interesting, Jill, when you were talking about wanting to approach the bench or courtroom the way you'd want in the sort of the mental space that you'd want your surgeon or pilot to enter into, that struck a chord with me, because when I walk onto a flight, if the cockpit door is open, and often it is, I'll say, "Hello, pilot. How are you doing today? How are you feeling?" Because, I just want to sort of look in their eyes. I want to make sure that they're not looking like they just had a fight or something. I want to make sure that they're okay, and that I want them to know I'm counting on them, and that I need to get back here. I hadn't really thought about that in terms of justices or judges, because you are touching as many lives. When you think about impacted or affected family members, you're touching as many lives. And if you're not in a good headspace, when you move into or go into your courtroom or into session, that could have a very negative effect on the people whose lives are going to be determined, or the trajectory of that life or their experiences, by their actions and the subsequent rulings. And so I like that analogy that you made in wanting to be in similar headspace.
Right. And to even take it one step further, Alex, one thing that we don't do in the legal profession is we don't do a lot of talking about attorney and judicial well-being, and attorney and judicial resilience. And what can we do to make sure that we are taking care of our mental health? I mean, every attorney and judge I know go somewhere to get a professional to get their hair cut, a professional to get their teeth cleaned, right? A professional for them to get their oil changed in their car. And yet people are very, very resistant to seeing a professional to help them with their mental health. And I think it's something that I talk about every opportunity I have to talk to groups of people. I'm giving a presentation about it at a national conference in a couple of weeks. We need to do better by attorneys. We need to do better by judges. We need to talk about how to make sure that we are taking care of our mental well-being and the mental well-being of everybody around us. Because that's the only way you can walk into those spaces and perform at your best. And the stakes are too high for all of the lives that your decisions impact.
Yes. I hope that there are a lot of professionals who are listening to this, who are taking heed. Jill, I want to do a little bit of round robin with just things I've been noticing in the news or trends, and I'd just like to know your thought about them. And if you need to put a disclaimer in that, hey, I'm a judge, but I'm just saying this as Jill, a lawyer, so that it's not reflective as a official statement. I totally get that. So feel free to say that disclaimer ahead of time. But I think that because I have a rapport with you, you've been on the show before, having you serve as sort of a Black Like Me correspondent, coming on sometimes and just allowing me to process these sort of legal matters is really helpful. So I had a talk recently with Ben Wickler. He's the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. And he and I become friends also. I just interviewed him. His interview is going to be playing soon. But he just talked about places where he really feels that voting restrictions are becoming more pronounced, or the attempt to do that. That was important to me because now that, we're talking about what now, let's not rest on our, on our heels, on our laurels, and think we've arrived. In your opinion, as a judge, as a lawyer, as a professional, with whatever hat you need to have on to answer this, is there a greater attack on voting rights today than what we've seen in recent years, in your opinion?
So I am going to be very careful here because there are, I think, up to 10 bills in the Wisconsin legislature that concern voting in Wisconsin, and any one of those could come before us.
Okay.
I will say this though, that anything that makes it more difficult for people to vote, certainly ends up suppressing the vote. And I'll just, what I'm thinking about is the election, and we talked about this last time, is the election that happened last April 7th, where people had to choose between being exposed to COVID and having their voice heard.
Right.
That made voting less accessible for people. They had to make an impossible choice. Do I stay home and not participate in the election and stay safe? Or do I go to the polls, participate in an election, and possibly become exposed to this disease? And so I think, there are many. So I think voter suppression has many, many different faces.
Sure.
And I think that's really what your question is
Mm-hmm.
getting at. And so I think that was absolutely an instance of trying to suppress the vote. It didn't work, but that it absolutely was.
And for Black Like Me podcast listeners who aren't necessarily certain of the reference, back last April, what was it, Jill? Maybe 180 plus polling sites were reduced to only 8
5.
sites.
There were 182 in Milwaukee were reduced to 5, and the governor, the governor asked that the election be postponed for a number of weeks. Right. And
the Supreme Court stepped in, right?
Yep, and the Supreme Court said, no, you're going to vote tomorrow on the evening of April 6th, the evening of Monday, April 6th. Both the Wisconsin Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court refused to postpone the election or make it easier for people who are voting by absentee to give them extra time. And they said, no, the election is going to be held tomorrow. And the significance of that is that every other state, it was also the presidential primary, every other state that had held the presidential primary since COVID, since we really understood how dangerous it was on March, I think it was around March 10th, every state had moved the date of their election except Wisconsin. This was the first state that held an election.
Wow.
Once COVID became really, really serious in the United States.
And I know Black families, Black relatives, Black people in Milwaukee who sat in their cars for 3 hours waiting for their turn to vote.
People were so brave.
People
were so brave, Alex,
yes.
to go and vote on that day. I was reduced to tears over and over and over again.
Wow. It's so when people, it's so odd then, and this sort of moves to the next sort of topic in the round robin discussion, is that all the recounts that happen and the accusations of fake elections, and that that they would be recounted in Milwaukee, that a place where voters earlier that year risked their lives to vote, and now to sort of insinuate that these same groups of folks, these patriotic voters, are somehow illegally voting. It's really an affront to people who are trusting and relying on this electoral process. I just thought that was very offensive to go to that community, Milwaukee in particularly, and question the votes, knowing that that community had already shown to what degree they are willing to vote.
I could not possibly agree with you more, which is, I think now you're talking about the Trump versus Biden lawsuit that occurred here in the state. And I can talk about that because that is in the rearview mirror.
Okay, great.
And that is why in the concurrence to the opinion, Justice Dallett and I wrote a concurrence saying that there was no evidence of fraud in this election. There was no evidence of fraud in this election. I thought it was really, really important to have that in writing attached to the main decision. And I had many questions during oral argument about how you come in and you file a lawsuit against only 2 out of 72 counties. The lawsuit was only in Dane and Milwaukee counties. And those counties, as you and I both know, are the most populous counties.
Yes.
They're the most diverse
Yes.
counties. They have the highest population of African Americans. Milwaukee, of course, Milwaukee County, of course, far more than Dane County. And they both, lean Democratic. And those were the 2 counties that the Trump campaign decided to try to toss out the votes. They were going to toss out the votes. I think it was to try 227,000 voters in those 2 counties.
Yes.
And I said it at the day of the oral argument, and I will say it again. The lawsuit smacked of racism.
It had to have. I mean, you said there are 72 counties in Wisconsin.
Yes.
And only 2 were targeted. It's the 2 that tend to lean more, towards Democratic voting, but also with that are the most diverse counties in the state. And that was just that's on international television that this is going on. And it's on one hand, it's so racist, but to the unsuspecting eye, that could just seem so subtle. But I think that smacked of racism too. I'm glad you called that out because I wanted to know if anyone else saw it that way.
It's meant racism, and the allegation of fraud. If you look back on history, and I know that you are a history buff, haven't taken your Black history class. If you look back at history and you look at how fascist dictators take over, they begin with the big lie. They begin with the big lie, and they say it over and over and over again. A big lie, such as the election was a fraud. And so we who care about our democracy, who are protectors of our democracy, who are willing to take whatever steps are necessary to preserve our democracy, when that big lie is being perpetuated, we need to stop it in its tracks.
Yes. Yes. Now, if you can't answer this, next question. People won't even know I asked you it because Eli
Okay.
time right now and will delete it. And so don't even answer, just say I can't answer that.
Fair enough.
But I'll just say in general, are there justices at the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court level in states? I'm sorry, let me re-ask this, Eli. That was just, let me just ask this. I'm curious. So so anyway, I don't have to say the other part of it. I'm curious from your perspective, Jill, can you say, are there justices across this country who believe that the election was stolen? Okay, I won't. Okay, that's not even recorded.
Let me say this, that there were 61 lawsuits.
Oh, you're gonna answer? Okay, good. When you were silent for a minute, I thought, "Ooh, I must have insulted her."
No,
No,
you're okay.
no,
I'm gonna answer it this way.
Okay.
There were over 60 lawsuits filed in connection with the presidential election. President Trump lost every single one of those. And every single one of those, every judge or justice who had the opportunity to rule against the Trump campaign did, except there was one case involving more of a procedural matter. I believe it was in Pennsylvania. And there were, of course, the 3 justices on the Wisconsin Supreme Court who ruled in favor of his campaign. But those are the only ones I know of out of all of those lawsuits.
Okay. No, that's helpful. That's just interesting. January 6th, this insurrection. I watched this on television, as did, folks from around the world. And I had 2 clear thoughts, Jill. One was, oh my gosh, this is really happening to the state capitol. This is horrible. This is a mockery of our nation's capital. The world is watching. What must they think? But then I thought, there is no way in hell that me and my Black friends could go scale the Capitol and do that kind of stuff and take a Black Lives Matter flag or a Black Panther flag or a flag from my church. So I watched that thinking there's no way in hell as a Black man, me and my friends could do that and take a Black Lives Matter flag or Black Panther flag or something like that into the Capitol or even around the Capitol without being shot. I just sort of thought this thing is a slam dunk thing. These people are all going to jail for a long time. Then I started seeing news articles saying, oh, this particular person that was spotted wearing this, doing this, won't be at the inauguration. And I was thinking, well, of course he won't. He's in jail, right? Then I found out he wasn't in jail. And so am I crazy for just thinking that justice might have just treated Black folks differently? Am I being hypersensitive right now? Because I just can't see Black people having done something like that at the state capitol.
Well, look, I think that all we need to do is just juxtapose what happened at the Capitol on January 6th with what happened right outside the White House when they needed to clear everyone away so that President Trump could go to the church across the street in June.
You're right. You're right.
I think right. Just look at the pictures of what happened in both those incidents. And I think that, answers your question.
Wow. Well, I love the way that you straight shoot. That's because that comes with the territory. That's part of the job. The next thing I'm sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, I mean, I just, like you, Alex, I watched the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th and couldn't believe it. Between college and law school, I worked up at the Capitol and I interned up there for 2 out of 4 summers of college before even graduating. I could not believe what I was watching. I could not believe the access that they were getting. I couldn't believe that they were able to find offices like Nancy Pelosi's office. The Capitol is a maze. It is really challenging to figure out like how to get to certain offices. So, yeah, absolutely. They were vile. I was watching it was so upsetting. I think what was even more upsetting was listening to the audio a number of days later, and just listening to the taunting of what I heard was the taunting of an African-American Capitol police officer. It was just horrible. And the noise that went along with it. I don't know why hearing it made it even more upsetting than seeing it, because I was already quite upset, and maybe it just added to it. But it was an insurrection. I think it taught us both how fragile and how strong our democracy is. I was glad that the Senate came back into session later that day and finished their business. But that was terrifying.
When we look back in history, how large of an ordeal will this be?
Massive. The Capitol hadn't been invaded since 1812. Wow. The first time since 1812.
And when people watch that on television, it's not as menacing to folks when it's white people. Again, I just keep thinking, I don't know how many people they estimated. What was it? A couple of hundred? Was it like 500 people they estimated?
It may have. I'm not sure about the number.
But it was a lot of them. But when you just think about people who are doing peaceful protest in Ferguson, just walking, locking arms, praying, people were threatened with tear gas and other kinds of forces. It's just amazing to me that the country found itself on its heels. And
it's inexplicable.
It's just inexplicable. It reminds me of who's the guy from Alabama, Bull Connor, who ambushed the Freedom Riders bus and gave police and the sheriffs a mandate to stand down for 15 minutes to allow them to beat those young Americans, that cross-cultural group that were riding the buses together. They gave them a command to stand down. I'm not saying that that people were radioed and told don't go, but how you have something so egregious and so public and so televised and carried on social media, and to not have a response that's just as powerful, just as strong, was really upsetting as well.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, Alex, we could talk all day about the comparisons. I mean, I'm thinking about the people who had the hell beaten out of them for crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge
Yeah.
to
Yes.
vote. And this sort of circles back to everything that we're talking about, right? Is that fundamental right to vote, that most basic right, and to have your vote counted, which is what they were doing on January 6th, is fundamental to our country. And you can see people either using violence or withholding violence to try to impact the outcome of elections. And that is terrifying and is completely un-American.
Right. Right. And it's reminiscent of our past that happened during the civil rights, as you mentioned, in, when folks were crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in '65, but also after Black people had elected some 2,000 Black folks. We talked about this in the U.S. Black that you participated in. Some 2,000 Black folks were elected to public office, but then assaults started at the poll, the literacy test, the grandfather clause.
They would chase people down. I mean, I'm telling you what you already know, after they voted, and kill them 2 weeks later.
Yes, yes. And so these are tactics that the U.S. has used before when it wanted to suppress a vote or voice. And so we can't promote democracy. We can't pretend to be this democratic giant in the world community, and then we're reacting this way when the vote doesn't go our way, because Black people have dealt with suppressed votes where we believe votes were suppressed, and we were suppressed, but we still kept voting. And so a legal election takes place, people think that it's taken from them, and they take to the streets and to the Capitol. Anyway, it's something that we can't unsee, and it forces us to really think about: are there 2 or 3 Americas that we see when we see it, and is it or isn't it a place for us all? And when it seems to be helping some others who have not typically been helped, does it really frighten us that much? Isn't that who we have been, a place where where folks could come? So it's that was just something else crazy just to process after COVID and all the things that that took place, all the the murders and the police brutality and the demonstrations. We just thought that the beginning of 2021 was going to give us a sigh of relief, and that we're going to begin to see signs of upward mobility. And we are, and we will. That was just very interesting to witness 6 days into the new year.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why your podcast is so important, because you're saying, what next? What now? We're not there. We are not there. And just because the calendar flips over from one year to another doesn't make things suddenly magical and okay and fair and equitable and accessible to everyone. Our work really is just beginning.
It's just beginning. Just beginning. Speaking of having not arrived and that we've got to keep pushing and working, you've got your work cut out for you too, Justice. I saw an article recently where a 23-page report about racial disparity in Wisconsin's prison system was sort of delayed or tucked away by leadership, in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And I was thinking, wait, I'm not even sure if this is accurate, because no, that you can't do that. Everything is public record, everything's above board, and so I even wrote you and said, hey, Jill, is this true? Was this report hid? So I'm going to have a link for this in my show notes. But there was a state-funded report, just looking at the racial disparities in sentencing, not necessarily just in incarceration. We see those reports, but a report in sentencing. And now this is where I'm losing my information. I don't know how long that report went off radar before it sort of resurfaced. Do you happen to know, Jill?
So this is what I do know.
Sure.
I know that there was an article in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel by Dan Bice,
Mm-hmm.
and that was on February 12th of this year. And the headline is Supreme Court didn't release study showing Black men 28% more likely to do prison time in Wisconsin. And in that article, it talks about, of course, the study that you're talking about. So I just want to
Yeah.
say two things, if I may.
Sure.
Number one, the headline says Supreme Court didn't release the study. The Chief Justice knew about the study. I didn't, and I don't know if what other justices did or didn't, but it says Supreme Court, and I can just tell you it wasn't all 7 justices, or at least I didn't know
Sure.
about it.
Sure.
The date on the report is January 2020. And the way the report came to light was that in June, after everything that had gone on in Minneapolis regarding George Floyd,
Right.
a number of my colleagues on the Supreme Court, former justices, some judges on the Court of Appeals, wrote a letter talking about the fact that that we need to talk about recent events because they remind us of the systematic and institutional racism that's embedded in our country in the legal system. And we talked about ways that we, as leaders of the judiciary, could start talking about these issues and concrete action that we could take. And at the same time, the Chief Justice Rogensack, sent an email to the court system, to all circuit court judges, dated June 22nd, 2020, where she said that she has the utmost confidence in the Wisconsin judiciary. She says, my research and that of Dr. Thompson, who's the author of the report we're talking about, have shown that my confidence in Wisconsin's judiciary is well placed.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so she's saying that even though this is 6 months after she's had a report that shows that Black men were 28% more likely to do prison time in Wisconsin than
Wow.
than
The white
than
counterpart.
than their white counterparts. Men who, I've got the report in front of me. It's also true for American Indians, Hispanic. I mean, it's,
It's just horrible.
yeah. Yes, the disparity is there. And so what we need to do is we need to acknowledge the disparity. And we need to say that if your skin is not white, you are likely to be treated in a way that is not equal to the way your white counterparts might be treated in the justice system. So, let's just, that's the truth. Let's accept that truth. Okay. As painful as it is. What are you going to do about it? It's sort of like, it's almost like, and I'm gonna make this analogy, Alex, and I don't want it. I don't want it to have an analogy that is diminishing its impact. But if you are not feeling well, sometimes you don't know how to treat it until you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "This is what's wrong with you." Then you can figure out what to do about it.
Right.
But if you ignore it, it only gets worse. So we can diagnose this. The diagnosis is that if you are African American in the Wisconsin state justice system, you are 28% more likely to do prison time.
Right.
So what do we do about it?
Hi, this is Amy from Eugene, Oregon. I listen to Black Like Me because I want to hear different perspectives and push myself out of my comfort zone as a white person. I support the podcast as a Patreon because it's an awesome show and I know it takes a ton of work and effort to make it all happen.
Hey, what's up, Black Like Me family? We are celebrating the 5th year of this award-winning podcast, Black Like Me. It now has a reach throughout the U.S. and in over 100 countries around the world. This podcast is changing the conversation about race in America. By going to patreon.com/Black Like Me and signing up at any of the levels offered, you are not only signing up to make a monthly donation, you are also helping to create better content and, more importantly, joining a growing community of people interested in engaging the issue of race with a raw, unprecedented honesty and creating a better society. And as a patron of the podcast, you'll have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, and video chats with Dr. G. You will also have a chance to join the conversation that other patrons are already having with Dr. G about race in America. So to become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/Black Like Me or see the link in our show notes. And for as little as $2, you can support these important conversations and the work that Dr. G is doing. Thank you in advance.
So when some listeners, some of our white folks who hear this, they're thinking, well, of course, Black people are doing more crimes. Black people are doing, that's why it's happening, because justice is blind. But, part of the work of my organization, we do a lot of work with reentry. We're finding that it's on a per capita basis. It's not like Black people are doing more drugs or more crimes than their white counterpart, but we're finding that Black people are being sentenced more. Not that Black people are 28 times more likely to do crimes. Of folks who are appearing before judges for felonies, Black men are 28 times more likely. That has to bring into question the judicial process. Am I correct, or is that just too sensitive?
No, I think it does. And I think that's why, when we sent the letter out, having taken your class and having had conversations with other judges and justices, looked at what other states did, we, in the letter that was signed by the other justices were Justice Ann Walsh Bradley and Justice Rebecca Dallett, and also Justice Lewis Butler and Janine Geske, who are both retired from the Supreme Court, a number of Court of Appeals judges. We said, look, there are concrete things that we can do. We need to, further, everyone needs to further educate themselves. And I just want to say, Alex, that I'm so glad that you are working with the Office of Judicial Education to start some of those conversations about how do we educate the judiciary. And I know that I know your plate is already so full, but I was really, really thrilled that you had time to do that, because that is going to be important.
Yes.
We need to acknowledge our own, implicit biases and prejudices. We need to support, our colleagues of color, because for them, these jobs are very, very different than they are. Understand their challenges and, value the gifts and perspectives that they bring. We are, this profession, the legal profession and judges, they need to reflect the people of Wisconsin.
Yes.
We need to have better mentorship programs. We've got to increase access to justice for people of Wisconsin, right?
Right.
And we cannot turn a blind eye to issues of racial disparity and mass incarceration. So I think, if you by looking at these studies, you can't turn a blind eye. If you look at this study, we've got to educate people. And like I said, we're starting that process. As far as the mentorship program, we need to fix this process. You are correct.
Absolutely. That's some great insight. And let me just say this, Jill. When we started this U.S. Black History course, which, by the way, is in its 6th year, last year was our largest cohort with 270 people. We have since moved it to an online platform. We're doing a beta test series right now. 1,700 learners are in it. But I'm proud that you, with 3 other judges, completed that. Yeah, so up until the cohort that just started, we've had almost 1,100 people participate. 1,700 are in it right now. So by the time this is finished, we will have about 2,800 people who have gone through that. That's about 1% of the Madison population 2,800 people who have gone through this, but there are people who thought you should be focusing on other initiatives within your community, which I am. Nehemiah has been doing that for 30 years. But basically, the challenge was, why are you working with good, well-intentioned, good-hearted white people and walking them through history? They already know this stuff. They've been through implicit bias training. I'm so proud that my team still kept pressing to do this, that you and three other judges went through this, and that you're sitting in this role now as a Supreme Court justice, and you thought about what you took in the class, and you've invited me and Dr. Christy Clark Pujara and I are going to be doing these trainings. We've got a district coming up, two coming up, one later this month and one next month. I feel really honored to be able to take this information and to train people who are aware of this report, who are having Black and Brown and Native American folks coming in front of them. It's a real honor to be able to have a chance to influence how they see the history of our democracy, where we're stuck, and where we can really go. So I have to thank you for mentioning me to those folks, because this is where we ask people who go through the class, take this information and open doors and help us to dismantle systemic racism. And this is one way in which a graduate of ours has taken what they've known and opened a door. And I'm thrilled and really proud to be able to do this, Jill. But you remember what you learned, and you brought us into this process. And I just have to let you know I'm excited about that.
Well, I'm really, really glad you're excited, and I'm glad I was able to make the connection. And your class was a game changer for me.
Wow.
I look at things completely differently, completely different lens after that class than I did before. And I just, really appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate your openness to talk with me afterwards and come and visit me in my courtroom afterwards. And I really just, enjoyed developing a friendship with you. And we both grew up in this area a couple years apart, and
Right.
know a lot of the same people from growing up, and it's been fun swapping those stories as well. So I value your friendship very much. And I know I've reached out to you in the past few months when I've had a couple of bad days, and heard from you after you've had some bad days. And it's been really, really nice to know that you are there, Alex. You're a really, really, on top of many other things, you're a really good, dear friend, and that means a lot to me.
Thank you. And that feeling's mutual, Jill. Thank you. One last thing I want to ask as we wind down, because I appreciate you taking time to do this, because I know justices are incredibly busy.
No more busy than you are, my friend.
That's okay. That's true. Okay. Touche. The idea of diversifying the bench, the importance of diversifying the bench really struck me when I read that that you and your colleagues are pushing for this. I thought, yes, this makes sense. But then I asked myself, am I understanding the undertone? Is this really implying that as the bench becomes more diverse, rulings change? Like, as a bench becomes more diverse, is there the expectation, or at least the anticipation, that the fact that 28%, that Black men are 28% more likely to go to prison than their white counterparts, can a diverse bench really change that, Jill?
Sure. So think about the times in a courtroom when a judge has the most discretion. And in a circuit courtroom, in the criminal courtroom, a judge has the most discretion in two places. Number one is, what is the sentence? Because the options are in some ways endless, right? There's if it's a felony, prison, but even if it's a misdemeanor, you have jail, you have probation, you have different lengths, you have conditions of probation, you have fines. There's just so many things that you can do when it comes to sentencing someone. Mm-hmm. So does an individual person's perspective matter? Sure. I mean, is it gonna and I'm not saying that they're going to be wild swings.
Exactly.
But can it make a difference? Yes, it can make a difference.
Wow.
The other thing where a judge, I believe, has the most discretion is how people in the courtroom are treated and how they treat each other.
Yes.
It is, what kind of atmosphere are you creating in your courtroom? And that is also hugely important when we think about defendants coming into courtrooms, victims coming into courtrooms, witnesses, professional staff. I mean, I would like to believe that we could have a court system where people leave that system in a better place than where they entered it.
Yes, yes.
And I do truly believe that if we treat people in the courtroom with fairness and with dignity and respect, and that everyone who walks into a courtroom knows that they will have an equal, that they're going to be treated equally, and they're going to get a fair shake, and that they're going to be heard, and they're going to be respected. They might not be agreed with, but if someone disagrees with them, they're going to do it respectfully.
Yes.
That you will empower people, and you actually could have people walking out of courtrooms feeling better, being in a better place than they were when they entered. And judges have a lot of power when it comes to that.
That's really important. As I read through one of the reports from one of the links you sent me, I just thought, I'm just going to ask the question, can this really make a difference? Because when we talk about the importance of diversification, this is what we're talking about. If we get more CEOs and doctors and judges and attorneys and police officers, people with different life experiences will have a different perception of a situation, which means they will think differently about alternatives and will think about different alternatives and how they would work. And so that's exciting. And that individual, that Black or brown person won't just think differently about Black and brown people, because there are a lot of white people coming before judges who need people to think creatively about options or their situations. And so it won't just be contained within communities of color. As we diversify the bench, it will help to bring that compassionate perspective. And not that others aren't compassionate, I don't mean to say that, but it will bring a perspective of an individual who's part of or has been part of a disenfranchised group, to bring that processing to everyone who appears before them. And that's a great opportunity. So I'm curious, is there anything that we can do on the ground level to push these recommendations? Because, we've got a machine inside Justified Anger. We've got people that are ready to write letters, make phone calls. And so whenever you need us to help, say, vote yes on this, or we need to write someone or email someone and say, we really want to see these things happen, we really want to see making the bench more diverse, please let me know, because I have folks who would love to get behind that and make some noise.
Sure. So, what I will tell people is that elections matter. All elections matter. And local elections for municipal judge, local elections for circuit court judge, for Court of Appeals, and definitely, obviously the Supreme Court, they all matter. And those elections are usually in the spring, and the voter turnout is usually quite low. And people need to stay engaged, being engaged and helping, what's next? Your question for this season, right? Or what do we do now? Is that how you're phrasing it?
Now what?
Now what? Make sure you
Right.
vote. I mean, that's one thing that is so important. There is an election in a couple of weeks for state superintendent of schools. There are 2 people running. If you don't know about the election, then get on the League of Women Voters website or some other website, learn about it and vote. How we educate our kids, who is in charge of DPI, all of that is hugely, hugely important. So I think that, part of when you are talking to people, you are in front of groups of people and you are, messaging people, that making sure that, they know when the next election is and they have a plan to vote. That is just going to be enormously, enormously important. We get to vote for our judges in Wisconsin.
Yes.
We get to vote. You get to hold your judges accountable in Wisconsin. Let's, use that power, use that tool.
That's power that we have. That's good. That's really good. Well, my guest today has been Justice Jill Karofsky. She's been on the Wisconsin Supreme Court for almost a year now, since April 7th of 2020. From time to time, I'm just going to be tapping her for her wisdom and her insight, her legal mind, just to help me process and think through questions I have about judicial processes, whether it's on a federal level or on a local level, because I think so much of this feels like jargon and we don't know how to process it. Justice Karofsky is going to help us to do that from time to time. So Jill, I appreciate you so much, what you're doing, what you do for our state and its impact on the country, and your concern for all people in our community, and your willingness to come and talk to this group and this audience, and your willingness to open doors so that white judges will have Black teachers, helping them to become better judges is a sweet opportunity, boy. When Dr. Clark Pujar and I were talking about this, we're just thinking, man, if our grandmothers could see us now, this is pretty.
It's making me cry hearing you say that, Alex. It
Wow.
really is.
It's when I called, for those of you who have not watched one of our history classes, I'm going to have to put a link up so that you can just see part of a lecture. You have to sign up for the class, but don't worry, we'll give you more information about that. But Dr. Christy Clark Pujar is a brilliant academician, and we've become friends. And
she does. I have not met her personally, but she does not suffer fools, does she?
No, she
is one smart woman.
She is. And when I called her, she said, of course. And so after we spoke with Morgan, she said to me, we're just on a call alone. She said, Reverend G, this has been my dream. Talk about the constitutionality of our legal system and how it is an ideal document that allows us to dream and become this country that we want to be, but it is also a document that has justified slavery and the chance that it's a living, breathing document. Like, she started talking about it like it was a great aunt, or like it was someone who sits on a rocking, chair and makes the best cookies for reunions. And she just feels so honored that she gets to talk about constitutional history with justices. And so she and I are so excited. We're nervous, and we know that
they're going to be blown away by the two of you. And if there's anything you want to run by me ahead of time, just shoot me a text. I'm happy to meet with you on Zoom or with masks on somewhere. And yeah.
No. We would love to do that. But I just want folks to understand this is how change is made. You think doing something that's not popular is not useful. I had an idea for history class. We run it for 6 years. Jill and her friends take it. Jill is touched by the information. She remembers it. She opens the door. Now we have 2 African Americans who are helping to bring education. This is part of a continuing education. This isn't just like Black History Month. Come and talk to us about Juneteenth, and we're going to sing Kumbaya. This is like continuing. This is required. And so this is serious. But when you open doors, this is what your white allies do. This is what allyship is. You don't just walk around having knowledge. You think, how can I use what I know? And how can I tap who I know to make connections that will make the system and the state and lives better? This is how we do it, folks. Build strategic relationships, give grace to each other, think strategically about how to work together. This is how change is coming. So Jill, I got emotional too. I even got off my closure here, but I just really appreciate you and this model of what allyship looks like. So listen, folks, here's what I want you to do. I want you to share this episode in particular, because we all know folks that want to know the behind the scenes about how these things work. That's why we grew up watching Perry Mason and Ironside and all these different LA Law. I'm showing my age. We want to share this with folks who need to understand, how we talk about law and race and criminal justice systems, and how we can change things if we dream together, if we work together, and if we speak up. Subscribe, because I'm going to be dropping bonus content from here and there. And if you subscribe, if you go to alexg.com, it's free. You just get an email saying these are the new bits of information that Dr. G has dropped. And if you've not yet done so, please click the Patreon link, because our growing list of supporters help us to maintain this podcast and to just increase its technological professionalism and its delivery and its marketing ability and its ability to be a great place for Black voices and Black and non-Black voices to talk together about our hope for a brighter world. If you want to be part of that, you want to be part of the Black Like Me podcast Patreon family, just click that link. We would love to have you. Go and take on the day, lean in, learn, be changed, and become the change that you want to see in the world. Be a part of that. Thank you for listening.
Black Like Me. Black like.
This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. It's Special shout out to Eli and to Jeremy, who are my engineers and my editors on this, to Don Thornton, who is my podcast manager, who makes sure that we line all of this up, to Corey Saffold, who is responsible for that exciting new jingle, that Black Like Me jingle. I'm so excited about that. And to vocals by Marcus Fleming.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Black like me.